you should really stop using manual mode on your camera. Let me explain. When getting started with photography, the only thing you hear is start shooting manual mode as soon as possible. And in a way they are right. You should definitely learn how to use manual mode and how to control the camera by yourself. But instead of going all in on manual mode from the start, I want to introduce you to some alternatives. Don't be ashamed, I fell in the same trap myself. I started shooting manual mode the same day I got my own camera. And I remember being super overwhelmed. How the hell do I combine ISO, shutter speed and aperture to get the best results possible? So in this video I want to show you two other useful modes that I think you should use more often, especially when getting started with photography. And no, automatic is definitely not one of them. Make sure to stay until the end of the video so you know exactly what mode you should use in which situation. Let's get started. First of all, let's have a look at what those two modes are. On your camera you probably have seen the modes AV and TV. Although it is possible that if you have a camera of another brand than Canon, these modes are indicated with an A or an S. Before getting into detail what these modes exactly do, let's have a quick look at what they mean. AV or A stands for Aperture Priority. This mode is all about setting your preferred aperture for your shot. TV or S on the other hand stands for Shutter Priority, and as the name indicates, this is all about setting the preferred shutter speed for your shot. Now you know what these modes mean, but why should you use them or in what situation should you use them? First let's talk about Aperture Priority. This mode lets you set your preferred aperture for your shot. Your camera then compensates the amount of light coming through your lens by decreasing or increasing the shutter speed. But what about your ISO? So you've set your preferred aperture for your shot. Now you have two options for the ISO. The first option is setting your ISO to auto. In this case your camera will automatically set your ISO in combination with the shutter speed to get the best results possible or the best exposure as possible. Obviously this can work in some cases, but for example in low light situations I definitely not recommend setting your ISO to auto. I like to also set my ISO manually so I can get a constant number and prevent the ISO from skyrocketing and getting a lot of noise in my photos. Most of the times I try to stay between 100 and 800 ISO depending on the situation and the amount of light. In general, Aperture Priority's goal is to get the perfect exposure for your pictures. Because your camera adjusts the shutter speed to achieve this goal, you have to be a little bit careful though. If you would use a small aperture like let's say f11, your camera will compensate this by setting a longer shutter speed. This leads to more light coming through your lens, but this also means that more movement and motion blur is being captured by the camera. I also have a sneaky tip for you guys. Because I want to recover most of the details out of my highlights or as much details as possible, I like to underexpose my shots with one stop. This simple trick helped me a lot of times when having a bright sky or just recovering details out of my sky, and it will make a lot of difference. Now let's talk about Shutter Priority. Shutter Priority works kind of the same as Aperture Priority. In this mode you set your preferred shutter speed and your camera will automatically adjust the ISO and the aperture to get the best exposure as possible. Unlike Aperture Priority, Shutter Priority absolutely doesn't guarantee you to get the best exposure. Due to limitations of your lens's aperture size, you easily can run into under or overexposed images. I will not get technical on you guys with crazy calculations, but take this for example. Let's say your preferred shutter speed is 1/125th of a second. To get the right exposure for the shot, you need an aperture size of f2. The problem is that the maximum aperture of your lens is f4, so it will stay at f4. To compensate for the difference, your camera needs to change something else. If your ISO is set to auto, your camera will increase your ISO by 2 stops. But you don't want that most of the times, do you? So because your shutter speed won't stop if you reach your maximum aperture, you will be left with an underexposed picture in this example. So as I mentioned before, you can set your ISO to auto, but I recommend to keep your ISO at a constant number because this way you will prevent unwanted noise in your picture. So now that we went over these different modes, what mode should you use in which situation? I must say that Aperture Priority definitely has the most use cases of the two. This mode is especially useful when shooting in a scene with changing light. Once you've nailed the settings of Aperture Priority, you can keep shooting without being worried about changing any of the values, and you will still get the best exposure anytime, any picture. Some examples of situations where Aperture Priority could be really useful is shooting weddings, shooting wildlife, shooting sports, or just shooting outdoor and natural like landscapes. When shooting in one of these scenes, Aperture Priority is probably the best choice for you. Shutter Priority, on the other hand, is especially useful when your shooting technique requires a specific shutter speed. This mode is also useful when you are shooting in a scene where there is intense light, for example on a bright sunny day. I am aware that these modes do not work in every situation. Some light conditions or desired results will force you to switch to manual mode. Every mode has its disadvantages and advantages, but at the end of the day it is important that you shoot with a mode that fits your needs and that works for you as a photographer. It is important to learn how to take full control over your camera and that you understand how every single value on the screen affects your shot. But remember, as long as your picture tells the intended story and intended feeling, it's not important in which mode you've taken the picture. Don't focus just on manual mode because all those pro photographers tell you to focus on manual mode. Hopefully you've got some value out of this video, and if you did, go ahead and give this video a like. Also, let me know in the comments what mode you are using the most, and make sure to watch this video to always take sharp pictures. Thank you for watching, I love you, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye.